Hello, everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel, Prof. Jeffrey Sachs Fan World. And here is today's content. Russia's latest large-scale missile attack on Ukraine marks not just another violent phase in this long and tragic conflict, but also a new phase in the global balance of military and morale. Reports from Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities describe the attack as one of the fiercest in recent months. A barrage of cruise and ballistic missiles, drones, and coordinated artillery strikes that left at least 4 people dead and dozens injured. But beyond the direct casualties, there is a deeper signal. Moscow is no longer simply fighting for territory. It is asserting technological dominance and psychological endurance in a war that has tested the outer limits of Western resolve. In this new phase, Russia's goal appears to be both symbolic and strategic. By demonstrating the effectiveness of precision-guided missiles, especially against targets protected by Western-supplied air defenses, the Kremlin is seeking to undermine confidence in Western military promises. The message is clear: NATO's shield is not impregnable, and American-made systems cannot guarantee security in a world where Russian and Chinese military technology has reached parity or even superiority in key areas. Every successful Russian attack on a defended site undermines not only Ukraine's defenses, but also the credibility of Western deterrence itself. The Ukrainian army, despite extraordinary courage and unprecedented Western support, is now fighting on 2 fronts, one on the battlefield, the other on the moral front. Billions of dollars in aid and weapons have poured in from Washington, Brussels, and London, but Russia's persistence has exposed the limits of material support without strategic cohesion. The West's initial belief in precision dominance, the idea that superior technology can ensure victory, has been slowly eroded. What once seemed like a defensive partnership now feels more like a prolonged test of attrition. Russia's attack is thus both a military operation and a philosophical event. It exposed the illusion that only technology can maintain order in a chaotic world. The war exposed not only the fragility of the skies over Ukraine, but also the fragility of the global system built on Western promises. What began as a defense of sovereignty has grown into a reckoning with hubris, a realization that no nation, no matter how advanced, can protect itself indefinitely from the consequences of complacency. This is more than a contest of arms. It is a confrontation between 2 worldviews, one that clings to the myth of technological salvation and one that accepts the crude, brutal logic of persistence. And in that contrast, the modern world glimpses a disturbing truth that the future of power will not belong to those with the best machines, but to those who can endure the longest without surrendering. From a geopolitical perspective, this attack is not just an escalation, it's a test of endurance. Russia is betting that Western political will is finite, that domestic fatigue in Europe and the United States will eventually erode unity faster than any missile strike. Moscow's calculus, by contrast, is long-term. It is fighting not just to control Ukraine, but to reshape the global order, to demonstrate that Western power, once considered omnipotent, is neither absolute nor permanent. The moral dimension of this conflict cannot be ignored. Every missile that lands on a Ukrainian city is a tragedy. Every failed interception is an affront to the people it promised to protect. But behind the technical failures lies a deeper question. Has the West confused technological might with moral might? For decades, the assumption has been that superior weapons equal superior civilization, that democracy and precision coexist as moral justifications for dominance. In Ukraine, however, that belief is disintegrating. The failure of Western-supplied air defenses to fully intercept Russia's latest missile barrage has exposed a troubling reality. The technological dominance Washington once thought was permanent is eroding under the pressure of a new multipolar arms race. The United States and NATO still possess enormous military capabilities, but capabilities are not capabilities. And in this war, Russia has rewritten the rules of engagement faster than the West can adapt. At the core of this failure lies a fundamental asymmetry. Western air defense systems like Patriot, NASAMS, and IRIS-T are designed for predictable conflicts to intercept conventional ballistic missiles or aircraft operating within defined engagement ranges. But the Russian military has developed a layered attack architecture that deliberately overwhelms these systems. By combining hypersonic glide vehicles, maneuverable cruise missiles, and decoy drones, Moscow effectively forces Western defenses to waste ammunition and reveal their radar positions before the warhead actually arrives. This isn't just tactical ingenuity, it reflects decades of strategic investment. Russia, like China, has poured enormous resources into hypersonic propulsion, electronic warfare, and anti-access divided by area denial, a 2 divided by AD technology. These aren't defenses, they're asymmetric weapons designed to negate America's advantages in air power and precision targeting. When Russia's Kinzhal or Zircon missiles travel at speeds exceeding Mach, 8 interception times drop from minutes to seconds. No Patriot battery, no matter how sophisticated, can reliably engage a target-changing trajectory at that speed. The West's celebrated precision strike doctrine honed in Iraq and Yugoslavia simply doesn't apply in this new realm of speed and deception. Behind this technical failure is an ideological failure. Western militaries have long believed that technology equals invulnerability, that superior hardware guarantees strategic superiority. The defense industry, driven by profit and bureaucracy, continues to modernize incrementally rather than innovate fundamentally. U.S. defense contractors produce multi-billion-dollar systems optimized for procurement, not adaptability. By contrast, Russia and China's state-led models prioritize experimentation and risk-producing technologies that may be imperfect but are often more disruptive. The result is a paradox. The United States spends more than the next 10 militaries combined, yet cannot guarantee the interception of a single hypersonic weapon. Moreover, Western systems are built on the assumption of information dominance networks of satellites, integrated radar, and centralized command. But recent Russian attacks show an evolution in electronic countermeasures and GPS jamming, blinding these systems at critical moments. Ukrainian operators report instances of radar locks disappearing mid-fight or missiles being untracked by jamming. These are not accidents. They are manifestations of a doctrine that sees the electromagnetic spectrum as a battlefield. The West, accustomed to operating in an uncontested environment, is discovering what it means to face a pure adversary. Politically, these technical failures have enormous symbolic significance. The United States and NATO have touted their support for Ukraine as proof that democracy backed by superior technology can stand up to autocracy. Each successful Russian attack undermines that narrative. It shows that the Western defense umbrella, long considered omnipotent, now has holes that neither money nor rhetoric can fix. But the deeper problem is psychological. For decades, the myth of Western invincibility has been the foundation not just of military strategy, but of the global order itself. That myth is now cracking. If Russia, under sanctions and isolation, can challenge NATO's most advanced systems, what does that say about the future of deterrence? What happens when the arsenal of democracy can no longer guarantee defense, even for its allies? These are not accidents. They are manifestations of a doctrine that sees the electromagnetic spectrum as a battlefield. The West, accustomed to operating in an uncontested environment, is discovering what it means to face a pure adversary. Politically, these technical failures have enormous symbolic significance. The United States and NATO have touted their support for Ukraine as proof that democracy backed by superior technology can stand up to autocracy. Each successful Russian attack undermines that narrative. It shows that the Western defense umbrella, long considered omnipotent, now has holes that neither money nor rhetoric can fix. But the deeper problem is psychological. For decades, the myth of Western invincibility has been the foundation not just of military strategy, but of the global order itself. That myth is now cracking. If Russia, under sanctions and isolation, can challenge NATO's most advanced systems, what does that say about the future of deterrence? What happens when the arsenal of democracy can no longer guarantee defense, even for its allies? These are not accidents. They are manifestations of a doctrine that sees the electromagnetic spectrum as a battlefield. The West, accustomed to operating in an uncontested environment, is discovering what it means to face a pure adversary. Politically, these technical failures have enormous symbolic significance. The United States and NATO have touted their support for Ukraine as proof that democracy backed by superior technology can stand up to autocracy. Each successful Russian attack undermines that narrative. It shows that the Western defense umbrella, long considered omnipotent, now has holes that neither money nor rhetoric can fix. But the deeper problem is psychological. For decades, the myth of Western invincibility has been the foundation not just of military strategy, but of the global order itself. That myth is now cracking. If Russia, under sanctions and isolation, can challenge NATO's most advanced systems, what does that say about the future of deterrence? What happens when the arsenal of democracy can no longer guarantee defense, even for its allies? This is not the end of American military power, but the end of its monopoly. The era of unilateral security, when the West could attack with impunity and defend without consequence, is over. The war in Ukraine has exposed not only the limitations of Western missile defenses, but also the limits of imagination. The battlefield has changed, but the belief system that governs Western strategy has not. The failures of Western missile defense in Ukraine are symptoms of a larger transformation, the slow erosion of American technological supremacy, and the rise of a new state-driven innovation order centered in Eurasia. For decades, the United States stood at the frontier of military technology, fusing scientific ingenuity with industrial might. From the atomic bomb to GPS-guided warfare, American dominance rested on its ability to innovate faster and scale larger than any rival. But that age of effortless primacy has ended. Russia and China, once imitators of Western design, are now pioneers of independent paradigms, building weapons that embody an entirely different philosophy of power. Russia's hypersonic and cruise missile advancements did not emerge overnight. They are the product of 30 years of strategic patience born from necessity after the Soviet collapse. Deprived of NATO's economic resources, Moscow pursued efficiency over excess, focusing on asymmetric technologies that could bypass Western superiority rather than mirror it. Its scientific institutions, though underfunded by Western standards, operated with a singular goal: to deny the U.S. the comfort of distance. The result is a family of systems, avant-garde Zircon Kinjal, that redefine warfare not through quantity but velocity. These weapons render traditional doctrines obsolete. Bases, aircraft carriers, and even satellite systems become vulnerable to weapons too fast to intercept and too unpredictable to track. China, meanwhile, has fused industrial scale with digital precision. Its defense sector integrates artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and advanced materials research within a single national strategy. where America's innovation ecosystem is fragmented, divided among private contractors, congressional committees, and competing service branches. China's is unified by state purpose. Every advancement in civilian technology, from 5G to semiconductor design, feeds into its military architecture. The result is not just imitation of Western systems, but the creation of an alternative ecosystem where dual-use innovation, civil and military, flourishes under central coordination. The United States, by contrast, has allowed its innovation engine to be captured by financialization. Research is increasingly driven by shareholder value, not national strategy. Defense giants lobby Congress for legacy contracts rather than transformative breakthroughs. Budgets grow, but imagination shrinks. Each new weapons program costs more, delivers later, and achieves less. The F-35 fighter jet, symbol of American technological prestige, now epitomizes this pathology: dazzling complexity, astronomical expense, and vulnerability to cheaper, more adaptive rivals. The same logic governs missile defense programs optimized for profit cycles, not performance under real combat conditions. What was once the military-industrial complex has become a military-financial complex, an apparatus that sustains itself through perpetual procurement rather than innovation. Bureaucracy rewards caution, not creativity. Failure is punished more harshly than stagnation. This is why the United States, despite its unparalleled research universities and defense budget, finds itself surprised by Russian hypersonics and Chinese space weapons. It has confused dominance in spending with dominance in capability. The deeper problem, however, is philosophical. American strategy remains rooted in the Enlightenment belief that technology is a form of salvation, that progress in machines guarantees progress in civilization. But Russia and China approach technology differently as an instrument of sovereignty. Their goal is not innovation for its own sake, but independence from Western control. This difference in purpose translates into difference in results. While Washington measures success in market share, Moscow and Beijing measure it in autonomy. The global consequence of this shift is profound. Technological parity dismantles the psychological architecture of empire. For the first time since World War II, the United States can no longer assume that its military reach ensures geopolitical dominance. The diffusion of high-end weapon systems, hypersonics, anti-satellite arms, cyber warfare has flattened the hierarchy of power. We are entering what Sachs might call a post-hegemonic technological age, where innovation no longer serves stability but multiplies vulnerability. In this emerging world, superiority is fleeting and deterrence is unstable. The more nations pursue technological advantage, the more fragile the balance becomes. The U.S. finds itself trapped between nostalgia and necessity, unable to abandon the myth of technological exceptionalism, yet increasingly confronted by a world that no longer believes in it. The Ukraine war, then, is not just a regional conflict. It is the first theater of a global reckoning, a test of whether the West can, beneath the thunder of missiles and the moral language of defending democracy. The war in Ukraine has become a mirror reflecting the economic machinery that sustains it. What began as a geopolitical confrontation has evolved into an ecosystem of profit, a perpetual motion machine of spending contracts and narratives. While Ukrainian cities burn and Russian soldiers advance, the Western defense industry thrives. In Washington, London, and Brussels, war has become both spectacle and subsidy, the perfect convergence of moral theater and material gain. The political economy of war as it stands rewards continuity over resolution. Each escalation ensures another round of arms shipments. Every Russian missile strike justifies the next procurement cycle. Companies like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Northrop Grumman, the pillars of the U.S. defense industrial complex, post record profits, while policymakers speak solemnly of sacrifice. This symbiosis is not conspiracy, it is structure. A system built on the constant anticipation of crisis cannot afford peace. As Sachs has often warned, perpetual war has become the business model of empire. For nations in the global south, the war has exposed a Western order that preaches stability but exports conflict, that claims to defend morality while monetizing destruction. Philosophically, the moral erosion is stark. War has ceased to be a tragedy. It has become a transaction. The question is no longer how to end it, but how to manage it, how to sustain conflict at a tolerable political cost. This logic, once confined to empires, now governs democracies. The human dimension, the suffering of civilians, the collapse of infrastructure, the silent trauma of displacement disappears beneath the abstractions of GDP and deterrence. In this sense, the Ukraine war reveals the moral exhaustion of the Western project. It shows how a civilization that once defined itself by progress now survives through perpetual crisis. It cannot build peace because peace would expose its contradictions, that its prosperity depends on instability, its unity on fear. Jeffrey Sachs might call this the entropy of empire, the point at which moral energy dissipates into self-preservation. The war economy, once justified as defense, becomes an end in itself. And when war becomes normal, peace becomes unimaginable. That is the true cost of this conflict, not the weapons expended, but the conscience lost. As the smoke of war thickens over Ukraine and the world watches the failure of deterrence, a deeper question rises from beneath the noise of propaganda and policy. What does it mean for a civilization to lose its moral compass? The inability of Western missile systems to halt Russian strikes is not, in the end, the most profound failure. The greater failure lies in the illusion that technology, wealth, and military alliances can substitute for wisdom, that power without humility can sustain peace. The tragedy unfolding in Ukraine is not only geopolitical, it is existential. It marks the slow unmasking of a global order that has mistaken dominance for destiny. For decades, the West believed that the end of the Cold War had secured a permanent moral and technological advantage. The collapse of the Soviet Union seemed to affirm that markets, democracy, and American leadership represented not one possible future, but the only one. The phrase rules-based international order became a euphemism for unipolar control, a world where the United States could dictate norms while violating them at will. But wars, like history, have a way of revealing truth. The Russian strike campaign, the failure of Western interception, the resilience of China's parallel economy, these are all signals that the myth of Western inevitability is dying. The moral cost of that death is immense. A world once organized around promises of peace, progress, and human rights has devolved into a marketplace of fear and weaponry. Washington and Brussels now speak less of diplomacy than of deterrence, less of dialogue than of dominance. Meanwhile, Moscow and Beijing, despite their authoritarianism, speak the language of multipolarity and sovereignty, a rhetoric that resonates across the global South, weary of decades of Western lectures and interventions. The result is a geopolitical inversion. The West, once the moral center of global leadership, increasingly appears as its most aggressive outlier. This transformation carries a philosophical lesson that Jeffrey Sachs has long warned about: power without empathy corrodes itself. The West's failure to anticipate Russia's endurance or China's innovation stems from a blindness to the moral dimension of strength. Military might without moral credibility cannot inspire, it can only intimidate. And intimidation breeds resistance. The war in Ukraine has not isolated Russia, it has isolated Western idealism from global reality. Sanctions, threats, and weapons transfers have proven no substitute for diplomacy, dialogue, and restraint. Globally, the implications are seismic. The rest of the world, Latin America, Africa, South Asia, is watching this war not through the lens of ideology, but survival. They see a West that can summon trillions for armaments, but not for climate justice or poverty relief, that can mobilize fleets overnight, yet fails to deliver food to starving nations. The moral hierarchy of the post-war world is collapsing, not because America has lost strength, but because it has lost credibility. The path forward demands not escalation, but introspection. The West must rediscover what power is for, not domination, but stewardship. The war in Ukraine should have been a catalyst for diplomacy, not militarization, for collective security, not renewed blocks. Instead, it has become an indictment of arrogance, a lesson written in blood and ruin. If there is redemption to be found, it will not come from more missiles or alliances, but from the courage to confront one's own delusions. In his quiet way, Sachs might phrase it thus: we are not losing the world to autocracy, we are losing it to our own pride. The age of unipolar certainty is over. The challenge of the 21st century will not be to reassert dominance, but to relearn cooperation, to accept that humanity's survival depends not on who commands the skies, but on who can keep them silent. The failure to stop Russian missiles, then, is not just a failure of defense systems. It is a parable of civilization itself. It reminds us that every empire dies twice, first when it loses its moral purpose, and then when it refuses to see that loss. The question before the West is whether it still possesses the humility to see before it